Okay, we are now last session. Everybody got one more in them? If you don't, I won't be offended. But I'm going one more whether you... Okay, so we ended off last time introducing Israel kind of becoming God's people of inheritance and the nation that's going to be light to the world. And of course, we probably could fill in a whole message worth of content in between the establishment of Israel and Abraham, if not many messages worth of content, to get to the time of Christ. But we're going to just jump ahead a little bit because I want to point out some stuff that happens here because we really see a concentration of the spiritual element of heavenly war or spiritual warfare coming into play again. And perhaps without even needing to introduce it, Matthew chapter 4, we definitely get kicked right off into the temptation of Christ. And I'm personally of the opinion that Satan's no dummy, and he probably knows the Bible better than any of us do. He was there for all of it, so at least he knows the context probably better than most of us do. And I'm pretty convinced that when Jesus came on the scene, he knew who he was. We could argue, go back and say that the killing of the 2-year-olds and under with Herod, I don't know if there's any direct connection mentioned there. I don't recall, as in like Satan influencing that type of a decision. I don't know that's a far-fetched to say he did. I just, the first time we see him specifically mentioned, though, as stepping in and trying to thwart what's going on is Matthew chapter 4. And we won't spend a ton of time on this one because I think most of us are familiar with it, but we'll go through it real briefly here. Starting in verse 1, then was Jesus led up of the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he was afterward and hungered. And when the tempter came to him, he said, if thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be made bread. It has been pointed out many times that the temptations that the devil here throws at Jesus has close connections to what happened in the garden. At the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it was good for food, it was desired to make one wise, and it appealed to the pride of life. You kind of have a comparison here, but he sort of sorts it out by one at a time. Also interesting to just note that I haven't dug into this, but here we have, it's kind of a generic word for devil, and he's actually described as the tempter down here. I think it's probably a safe assumption once again to say that we're talking about the individual himself is Satan as we know it, and we'll see why we get to there in a second. But at any rate, verse 4, but he answered and said, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. Then the devil taketh him up into an holy city, and setteth him on a pinnacle of the temple, and saith unto him, if thou be the Son of God, cast thyself down, for it is written, he shall give his angels charge concerning thee, and in their hands they shall bear thee up, lest at any time thou dash thy foot against a stone. He knew the Bible well enough to quote it, for sure at least. Of course, there's a response. Jesus said unto him, it is written again, thou shalt not tempt the Lord thy God. Again, the devil taketh him up into an exceeding high mountain, and showeth him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them, and saith unto them, all these things will I give thee, if thou wilt fall down and worship me. And here's where we kind of actually really have a connection back to where we left off in the previous section. Now, there's a good amount of debate. Does the devil actually have the authority to offer these things? Well, if it's a true temptation, there's got to be some source of being able to do this. But what makes him capable of handing them over? Well, if God turned over all the nations to the other gods and their pact or whatever is that, hey, if you bow down, we'll just give them back to you, we're good, which gives Satan what he wanted in the first place, right? He wanted to be like God. He wanted to exalt himself. If I can get the Son of God to bow down to me, I get what I want. And ultimately, I believe God's desire was to restore those nations unto himself through Israel. So here, we can make this quick and easy. All you got to do is worship me, and boom, we both get what we want. We walk away, no harm, no foul. At least I can't find anything that would contradict that. But that does create a problem when it comes to, there's issues with the proposition. Verse 10, then saith Jesus unto him, get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. Now I have been pointing him out, and here all of a sudden you have the word Satan or Satan is in caps, interestingly enough. But verse 11, then the devil leaveth him, and behold, angels came and ministered unto him. We've got all these terminologies that float around, and people wonder, is the devil a description? Is it the person? It seems kind of interchangeable within the individual. I don't really have an issue with interchangeability or whatever. It's just kind of fascinating how it does kind of tend to weave and wander its way a little bit. But nonetheless, right before Jesus launches into his ministry, and if Satan here is catching on to what's going on, and he's anticipating this could be the one I've been looking out for now for thousands of years, maybe I can just entice him with a quick, easy fix to get through it all. But of course, that pretty much falls flat on his face. So we've got that. And then Jesus starts working through his ministry a bit. And what's interesting as we get into Jesus' ministry, and we talked a little bit about this in the Q&A session off recording, but for the sake of the recording, I'll mention it, just the lack of demonic activity that seems, as in demon possession activity, that you find in the Old Testament all of a sudden seems to ramp up in a tremendous way with the four Gospels and then into the book of Acts, of course. And it's fascinating that when Israel was going in to enter the Promised Land, they encountered all the giants. There was significant spiritual opposition. Well, now Israel inhabits the land, but that doesn't mean that there isn't opposition to what God's trying to achieve. And now all of a sudden it seems like there's this ramp up of demonic activity coming in. And we see that being dealt with in a number of places. Matthew chapter 8 would be one of these, probably one of the more well-known ones. Excuse me. And when he was come to the other side into the country of the Gergesens, there met him two possessed with devils coming out of the tombs, exceeding fierce, so that no man might pass by that way. And behold, they cried out, saying, what have we to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God? Art thou come hither to torment us before the time? It is kind of interesting that the way that the demons acknowledge him. First off, they know exactly who he is. So, I mean, if they know who he is, Satan knew who he was, I'm sure, too, right? But what caught my attention is interesting is he says, where was it? At the end of verse 29 there, art thou come hither to torment us before the time? Now, if you compare this section, we get a little more conversation in some of the other accounts. So you get the same story, or at least a very, very similar one in Mark chapter 5. I say similar because I think one account has two demon-possessed men, one has one. So one the debates is that, well, maybe they're talking two different events because otherwise one's wrong, right? Because you can't have two if there's only one. The argument is that, well, only one did the speaking, so maybe that's why it only highlights one. But we get a little more, it seems like the same event because it's the same location pretty much. And they came over to the other side of the sea, starting in verse 1, into the country of the Gadarenes. And when he was come out of the ship, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs, and no man could bind him, no, not with chains, because that he had been often bound with fetters and chains, and the chains had been plucked asunder by him, and the fetters broken in pieces, neither could any man tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying and cutting himself with stones. But when he saw Jesus afar off, he ran and worshipped him. And once again, wording is always intriguing. I don't know that worship meant he was doing worship in the sense that we did, but it seems like at least he's acknowledging him at the minimum, right? Verse 7, and cried with a loud voice and said, what have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of the Most High God? That's not exactly what we would call worship in a current church setting, but either way, I adjure thee by God that thou torment me not. For he had said, come out of the man, thou unclean spirit. And he asked him, what is thy name? And he answered, saying, my name is Legion, for we are many. I don't know if it's a spokesperson type thing, but it appears that you can have, there's many instances where multiple demons can take possession of the same body. But some of the wording here is interesting. First of all, torment me not. They're anticipating some form of judgment or reprisal here. And also it says, verse 10, and he besought him much that he would not send them away out of the country. Now we're getting to a common denominator here, but let me just jump to the last one for the fun of it. Luke chapter 8. Starting in verse 26. And they arrived at the country of the Gadarenes, which is over against Galilee. And when, for the record, the Gadarenes is on the, as I understand it, is on the east side of the Sea of Galilee, kind of northeast end. And at this point in time, it was either under Gentile control or very much Gentile inhabited, as evidenced by the fact that there were people there keeping a great herd of swine, because the Jews really wouldn't have a whole lot of need for keeping a great herd of swine if they were being kosher. And if they were keeping a herd of swine, that might just tell you the state of affairs if that was the case. But at any rate, verse 27, and when he went forth to land, there met him out of the city a certain man which had devils long time, and wear no clothes, neither abode in any house, but in the tombs. If we want to follow this through, you've got that same word for demon, dahimanion. So just translated devils in this one for some reason. Verse 28, when he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him with a loud voice, said, What have I to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God of the Most High? I beseech thee, torment me not. For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man, for oftentimes it had caught him and kept him bound in chains, and describes what was going on. Verse 30, though, once again, Jesus asked him, saying, What is thy name? And he said, Legion, because many devils were entered into him. And he besought him that he would not command them to go into the deep. Now, this one's the only one who brings up that element. The one says that they would not send him out of the country, but this particular one's kind of fascinating because it says they besought him, he would not command them to go into the deep. And here it's actually our word abyss or pit. Now, we can try to make some speculations here, but it almost seems like they were anticipating, look, we're still free to roam about. Don't send us into the pit now. Our time's not here yet. It's almost like the urgency comes in because we're not ready to give up this freedom yet. Find another location for us to go into. And that, it's really interesting. And then, of course, most are familiar with the story. Verse 32, there was there an herd of many swine feeding on the mountain, and they besought him that he would suffer them to enter into them. And he suffered them, and then went the devils out of the man and entered into the swine, and the herd ran violently down a steep place into the lake and were choked. Now, I've heard, actually, that pigs are really good swimmers, ironically. I didn't know that till recently. We were having a Bible study, and we had a guy that he worked on farms and stuff, and all of a sudden, out of the blue, he says, oh, pigs are great swimmers, apparently. So, keeping that in mind, going with that theory that we were kind of talking about, you've got the book of Enoch that says that the demons are the deceased spirits of the Nephilim and so forth. The comment was made, what did God do when he wanted to get rid of the giants? He drowned them. What did the pigs do when they wanted to get rid of the spirits? They drowned themselves. Water seems to be the solution, you know. But at any rate, you've got it's in a, that's just take that for what it's worth. I'm not. Matthew chapter 8. But but in that point, it's like the self-destruction. Why would they didn't want to leave the man? They didn't want to get sent out of the country. They preferred the pigs. Why would they destroy the pigs after they just begged to go into them? It's like they're looking for a place to be, and it seems like the pigs had a voice in the matter, and they wanted nothing to do with it. At any rate, where was I here? Matthew 28. Oh, I'm in the wrong. Oh, 8:28. I'm sorry. It's getting to be a long day. My eyes are not working with me. And you get the same thing here back in Matthew again. He said unto them, Go, and when they were come out, they went into the herd of swine, and behold, the whole herd of swine ran violently down a steep place into the sea, and perished in the waters, and they that kept them fled, and went their way into the city, and told everything, and what it was befallen to the possessed of the devils. And behold, the whole city came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they thanked him. The response is fascinating. They besought him that he would depart out of their coasts. And if this is truly Gentile area, more or less, it's fascinating that even the nations still have no desire to be involved. They just, here, leave us alone, get out, go away. They moved on. But what is fascinating, if the other gods, the sons of God, were given dominion over these other regions that Satan had offered back to Christ at in the temptation there, is this a case where Jesus has come on the scene now, and he's putting the fallen, the Elohim on notice, because now their territory is not safe. This activity had been going on for some time, and Jesus shows up, and they can't stop him. And it's almost like the opening salvo of a battle that's going to intensify pretty quickly here coming out. Matter of fact, there's been suggested that there was another opening salvo issued in Luke chapter 10. And this is another one I'll just throw out for you to consider or chew on. Here the Lord sends out some ministers, but what's been mentioned is the interesting part about the number. After these things, the Lord appointed other 70 also, and sent them 2 and 2 before his face into every city and place whither he himself would come. And there's no indication that he sent them to anybody but the Jews, but it's the number 70 trigger anything that we just talked about. And it's not that he sent them to the Gentiles, but is he kind of throwing in a little message here. Look, I'm preparing my people to do their job, and I'm sending out one person for every nation I establish back there. The 70 nations of Genesis chapter 10 could be coincidence, but it's kind of interesting that you do have the same number used in both. Is Jesus putting the fallen powers on notice that their time's coming to an end? Just kind of like the demons. It's not the time yet. They knew that much, but maybe it's getting close. And for the record, because I always hate when it gets referenced all the times, when you do go to the end of Genesis chapter 10, it's a whole bunch of genealogy things, but when you get to the end, it says, these are the families of the sons of Noah after their generations in their nations, and by these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood. So there you go. If you read that whole list, that's the summary of the matter. So I've referenced Genesis 10. It's probably worth pointing out. But that's the reason it's associated oftentimes with the number that's broken up and divided. If you want a little bit of a conflict of interest between the book of Enoch and the Bible at times, I think, didn't we say Enoch said there were 200? Or is it 120 or 200 that came watchers? 200? And if Deuteronomy says he divided them according to the sons of God and there were 70 nations, you may have a number discrepancy, but yeah, whatever. We won't dive into that, but it popped into my head one day when I was looking. Either way. So what's kind of significant? What else is kind of significant about this story? Remember we talked about the region of Bashan earlier, King Og and Sihon of Heshbon and such, and it was in that region of Bashan, the cities of Edrei and so forth. The region itself actually extended into the Gadarenes itself. This is actually taking place in the region of Bashan. It was also called Bathan, B-A-T-H-A-N, and as pointed out, the people in the region would refer to that place as the place of the serpent. As a matter of fact, Ashtaroth and Edrei, according to a lot of the religions, as I understand it, considered that region as the gateway to the underworld. There's Canaanite texts that actually ascribe that region as, so they held a lot of spiritual significance within this region as from a worship and religious standpoint. One of the features of the Bashan region, and maybe the high point, pun intended, of the Bashan region is Mount Hermon. Now we brought up Mount Hermon earlier. That also came up in reference to Og and Sihon. Mount Hermon comes in, and we also alluded to the fact that according to Enoch, first Enoch, that's where the Watchers descended. But either whether that's true or not, Mount Hermon was a huge place of worship. There was actually a temple of Baal at the Mount of Hermon where they would worship Beelzebub, the Lord of the dead. And so it was kind of the gateway to the region. And what's interesting about this is when we go to Mark chapter 8, this is not the only time that Jesus goes into this area and starts doing some interesting things. In Mark chapter 8, verse 27, says, and Jesus went out and his disciples into the towns of Caesarea Philippi. And by the way, he asked his disciples, saying, unto whom do men say that I am? Now I tried this, and I don't think it worked really ultra well. I don't know if I can zoom in on this. Let's see, probably. I'll just point it out. If you can see my cursor, this is Israel right here. Caesarea Philippi is way up here. And for the record, the Gadarene region was right down in this area, if I'm not mistaken. Interestingly, though, at this point in time in Jesus' ministry, we're getting towards the end of it. He's wandered all the way up here to Caesarea Philippi. What I could not find a map of in the break time is that just north of here on a topographical map, you have the Mount Hermon is located. As a matter of fact, if you've been to Caesarea Philippi, I hear you can actually, it's like the...
Yeah, it's right at the base of the mountain.
Yeah.
Caesarea Philippi.
Okay, yep, and it's kind of like dominates sort of the scene. So they're at Caesarea Philippi. Jesus asks, who do men say that I am? Verse 28, they answered, John the Baptist, but some say Elias, and others one of the prophets. And he said unto them, but whom say ye that I am? And Peter answereth and said unto him, thou art the Christ. And he charged them that they should tell no man of him. So we've got this conversation taking place in the location of Caesarea Philippi. Matthew also records this event, and we get a few more interesting details about this occurrence right over there. When Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, same thing, same question, and he pretty much gets the same answer. Verse 16, though, the answer is credited as coming specifically from Simon Peter. And it said, Simon Peter answered and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered and said unto him, blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. And I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And you can look up messages on this verse and probably get a different explanation for every message you actually find on it. But here's what gets kind of interesting. Caesarea Philippi, it's at the foot of Mount Hermon in the region of Bashan. I've seen pictures. You can go Google it. If you've been there, you've been over there, right? Yeah, and you've seen it. There's the place called The Rock, as I understand. Huge rock face. I've been told you can't miss it. At the foot of this rock face, there's 3 temples, if memory serves.
Yeah, at least 3.
I think there was at least 3. One was to Pan initially. I think one was to Baal. They're all dug into the base, as I recall. And this was and it was a huge religious area for the people of the region during this day, and it was called the Rock or the Gates of Hell, because they kind of viewed it as the gates to the underworld, as I understand it. And they worshiped the Lord of the Dead there. Now, here you've got Jesus telling Peter, hey, and I've heard the puns, Peter means rock, on this rock. Could it simply be that they're standing on the rock, the gates of hell, and he's telling Peter, thou art Peter, upon this rock that we're standing on right now, I'm going to build my church, and the gates of hell that it houses aren't going to prevail against it. And what's the significance to this? We're in the region of Bashan, the place of the dead. He's putting and if you are willing to incorporate the Mount Hermon symbology into the watchers coming down, having this tremendous, and I should clarify, there are some who will go as far as to say that man really wasn't responsible for messing up. It was all these angels came in and screwed everything up, and now we're all in trouble. And that, the Bible's clear, by one man's sin entered the world. However, they did seem to be an active participant in accelerating the downfall of man at some point in time or another. We have no problem saying that the serpent had his part in sharing the corruption of mankind. It sure seems like allowing other spiritual contributions would not be unfair at the least. So you've got this, is he just saying, hey, I'm putting those guys who came on the part of the problems I'm coming to fix. This is your region. This is your stronghold. These are the gates of hell. You guys, that's according to you. I'm going to come here and I'm going to build my church on it. And it's not going to stop me. And I don't think that was for the benefit of the inhabitants of the region, nor is the next event that takes place in this little scenario. Because what happens next? Let's go to, see which one I want. Let's say Matthew chapter 17. there's no indication between here and there that they've left the region. As a matter of fact, I think Mark goes right into it. They're still up by Caesarea Philippi. It says, after 6 days, Jesus taketh Peter, James, and John, his brother, and bringeth them up into an high mountain apart. Well, the mountain in the region is Mount Hermon. So he goes up there. Verse 2, and was transfigured before them, and his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias talking with him. Then answered Peter and said unto Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, and one for Moses, and one for Elias. While he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud, which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. And I guarantee that was as much for the apostles' benefit as anybody, but you have to wonder who else might have been paying attention. Let's look at the Mark account real fast. Same time frame, verse 2. Verse 1 finishes up that whole conversation he has prior to, where he tells them, some of you will not see death till you see the kingdom. Verse 2, and after 6 days Jesus taketh with him Peter, James, and John, and leadeth them up into a high mountain apart by themselves, and he was transfigured before him. And his raiment became shining, exceeding white as snow, so that as no fuller on earth can turn white. And there appeared unto them Elias and Moses, and were talking with Jesus. And you've got that same question, ending with the same, in verse 7, this is my beloved Son, hear him. And suddenly when they had looked around about, they saw no man anymore, save Jesus only with themselves. And as they came down from the mountain, he charged them that they should tell no man what things they had seen, till the Son of Man were risen from the dead. And they kept this saying with themselves, questioning one another what the rising of the dead should mean. So here it's kind of fascinating. You've got here's the stronghold, here's all the temples, here's the gates of hell. Jesus goes up on the mountain above it, where supposedly the watchers descended, and then reveals himself in his full glory as the Son of God. And God the Father announces out of heaven, this is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. And this is still territory, more or less, that's heavily under other Elohim control. And you could call it a warning shot over the bow. You could call it a poke in the nose or whatever you want to do, but it's almost, once again, as if Jesus is coming down and putting them on notice saying, hey, something's about to change here, because he's doing it in a very specific location for a very specific reason, I believe. And what's even more fascinating is that after this, more or less, they basically go to Jerusalem. If you keep reading the context, within a few weeks they're back in Jerusalem. He enters on Palm Sunday, and then a week later you have the crucifixion. This is right at the end. It's like as if they're pushing. It's within like an immediate context. He goes and stays with Mary and Martha and Lazarus, I think, for a little bit. But they're work their way back to Jerusalem. And it's not that much later that the crucifixion takes place. Well, what were they just asking here that they were wondering about? Verse 10, they kept that saying with themselves, questioning one with another what the rising of the dead should mean. He brings up this topic right above the temple of the Lord of the dead. And one of the things that Jesus is about to go do is die and conquer death and the dominion and the rule of death. And you can't conquer death unless you die, because you have to be raised again. And you can't be raised again unless you die first, right? But they didn't know that. And it would appear to some degree that the fallen powers of the region weren't necessarily totally up to speed with it completely either, because Satan's in a big hurry to wrap this thing up before it gets any more out of control. When we go to Luke chapter 22, we reach the Passover night, right before the arrest in the garden. And we've got the leading up to it here. Verse 1, now the feast of unleavened bread drew nigh, which is called the Passover, and the chief priests and scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. Then entered Satan into Judas, surnamed Iscariot, being of the number of the 12. That always, another one of those things that kind of jumps out. Satan entered into Judas. There's a lot going on here. Judas was never indicated that he had any true following or was of any loyalty to Christ or to God, but at this point in time, it seems like Satan's definitely taking a personal interest in the events that are about to take place. And he went his way and communed with the chief priests and captains how he might betray him unto them, and they were glad and covenanted to give him money. And he promised and sought opportunity to betray him unto the absence of the multitude. Satan's direct hand in attempting to put this crucifixion, I guess I've chewed on this because we don't get a lot of information as to why Satan would be so enthused with trying to make this happen. You do have enough prophecy in the Old Testament that seems to indicate that Christ was going to go and die. So it kind of seemed like he was helping the fulfillment of the plan, but it almost seemed like, look, if I can just get this over with and he doesn't take back what gave to all of us, then maybe we take a victory. All we know is that his involvement in this thing was, to some degree, an act of ignorance. 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Starting verse 6. Howbeit we speak wisdom among them that are perfect, yet not the wisdom of this world, nor of the princes of this world that come to naught. And I don't think princes of this world here makes sense in a human form. When Jesus was being put on the cross, Pilate washed his hands of it. He didn't really, actually in some ways you could say he was trying to back out of it. He was the only other official of any other nation that was represented there. It was the Jews who cared about it. But if the princes of this world, which is a terminology that seems to be used, for example, you've got in the book of Daniel, when the one angel appears, it says unto him, I would have been here sooner, but the prince of Persia withstood me. So Michael came and helped out, but now I got to go back because the prince of Greece is coming. And again, it's kind of like disputing over the body of Moses type subject matter. I'd love to know more about what on earth all that was involving, because it's like there's something going on in the background where you've got these entities, but they're all referring to the princes. Why are they princes? Because they're the gods of the world. They're the ones who has been given dominion and control over the nations. And if the princes of this world, it says, nor the princes of this world, they didn't know that come to naught, but we speak the wisdom of God in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom which God ordained before the world unto our glory, which none of the princes of this world knew, for had they known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. And not only did it spell ultimately their death blow and his assertion of God's authority over their own dominions, but we're going to find out that they lost it either way, even though Israel fell down the road. God's kind of usurped that authority coming up here anyway in regards with the dispensation of grace. We're going to see that come out to play here shortly. As far as Jesus' death is concerned, here's another interesting little thing. Psalm chapter 22. Of course, this is the one where you've got it seems like a very accurate description of the crucifixion coming up. And because you've got starting in verse 13, they gaped upon me with their mouths as a ravening and a roaring lion. I'm poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is melted in the midst of my bowels. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue cleaveth to my jaws. Thou hast brought me into the dust of death. For dogs have compassed me, the assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierce my hands and my feet. I may tell all my bones that they look and stare upon me. They part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture. But be not thou far from me, O Lord, O my strength. Haste thee to help me, deliver my soul. And of course, we've got all these, they pierce his hands and feet. They part my garments. You've got the casting of lots. But what he starts off with here is really kind of a fascinating reference. It says, way back in verse 11, be not far from me, for help is near, for there is none to help. Many bulls have compassed me. Strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. What's that reference to? Now, if we want to play a little connect the dots, the bull was very much a religious figure, especially of Baal. The bull was a huge religious figure of the day, and it represented a lot of the gods. Bashan is the place of the serpent. Is he referencing the part that maybe everybody who was there didn't see, but he knew was there? Or is it the spiritual powers that were interested in waiting to see him die and put all this to a close. It's prophesied they were going to have a hand in it. Now, I don't know that they knew that what was going on from way back. If they had known this was their demise, I'm sure. But there's nothing in here that says that, oh, and they're going to lose the battle because of it. The prophecies are somewhat vague, but you get this interesting element that's thrown in right there. And then even going back to the Gospels here, which one is it? I don't have this one written down. Where is the reference where it's right at the end there, and it says, Peter's talking with Jesus, and Jesus says, Satan hath desired you that he may sift you as wheat. Is that in Luke? Is it Luke or John? You didn't know there was going to be a test. I had something pointed out to me just recently on this one, and boy, I want to feel like, wish I could find, and it's not essential to the conversation if you guys are familiar with the oh, it's in Luke chapter 22. Oh, look at that. I was in the right chapter even up here. Oh, it's right after Satan entered into Judas, surnamed Iscariot, being the number of the 12. You get down to verse 31. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. In my head, I always thought, oh, well, good thing God wouldn't let him do that, right? But the answer that Jesus, or the comment that Jesus makes next almost indicates that, and he's going to get his request. Because he says, verse 32, but I have prayed for thee that thy faith fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. Satan enters Judas. Satan wants a shot at Peter too. And the indication almost seems that God's like, okay, that's fine. Now we can draw a bunch of things here. It still seems that Satan has to request or have expressed some form of a desire in order to get his way in these matters. But he does ask for it, and Jesus doesn't say, and God said no. No, but I'll pray for you. And when you come back, and that your faith doesn't fail, and when you're all through this test, strengthen your brethren. Satan just seems to be moving in, taking a very, very significant hand as we keep moving in closer and closer to that crucifixion phase. You've got the bulls of Bashan ranging about the cross. And then, of course, we know that the crucifixion was really the death blow. And we referenced it earlier. I didn't go into a lot of details, but let's go to 1 Peter chapter 3 real quick. 1 Corinthians, we got the princes of this world. If they had known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But they did it. And then what happens? While Jesus' body's in the grave, what does he do? 1 Peter chapter 3. And we're back to those angels that sinned in the days of Noah, starting in verse 18. For Christ also hath once suffered sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit. There's our crucifixion element. By which also he went and preached unto the spirits in prison. And one of the key elements here is the word preached. It's not to evangelize. It's not evangelion is the one that's usually used to describe when you go out and share the gospel and give people a second chance. Because there's an argument out there that, is he, after he died, Jesus went down and witnessed to the lost. No. He's talking about a very specific group of people, and he didn't go down to give them a second chance at anything. This word simply means to proclaim as a public herald. And if you got a public crier out giving a message, there's no room for debate. You're getting the end of the matter, right? And these particular spirits are the ones, verse 20, which sometime were disobedient when once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah while the ark was preparing, wherein few, that is 8 souls, were saved by water. What on earth could he possibly have had to say to them? The mess that you guys created, I just got done paying the price for it and starting the cleanup process and reversing it. It's something, I'm sure that wasn't exactly how it went, but to some degree, you guys just failed. Because here I am, I just did it. And I don't know what kind of access the other members of the spiritual realm have to this location where these spirits are imprisoned, or Tartarus as it were. I'm sure they don't want to get anywhere close to it. But I think they all kind of went on notice suddenly that they just made a big mistake. And then Ephesians chapter 4 seems to indicate that not only did he go down and preach to them in prison, he also took them out of prison for a little bit and held a victory parade in the streets of heaven, as it were. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 8, wherefore he saith, when he ascended up on high, he led captivity captive and gave gifts unto men. That phrase, captivity captive, is typically used of a conquering king going in and taking his prisoners and then parading him through the streets of his hometown to demonstrate his power and victory over the enemies. Verse 9, now that he ascended, what is it but that he also descended first into the lower parts of the earth? He that descended is the same also that ascended up far above all heavens, that he might fill all things. Here, let's take you back to heaven so I can demonstrate my wisdom, my power, my glory in front of all of the ones who stayed true to me, and potentially it's for the observation of some of those who didn't. And I'll tuck you back away then after that. But we're going to have a parade, and I'm going to give gifts unto men, and I'm not going to wander down the gifts road at this particular time. But you get this notion of you guys blew it. And they know it coming up too. And then on top, to add injury to insult, what happens after the crucifixion? I can't remember how much about this I said when in the last session, but I'll just re-go over it somewhat. Christ comes back. He's got his meetings with them. He tells them to wait in Jerusalem until the Spirit comes. And once again, I believe he's prepping Israel to go out and be that mediator between God and man so that they can go serve him. And it starts off in, let's see. I hate looking for the reference that I'm looking for. There we go. In chapter 1, let's start in verse 4. And being assembled together with them, commanded them that they should not depart from Jerusalem, but wait for the promise of the Father, which saith, Ye have heard of me. For John truly baptized with water, but ye shall be baptized with the Holy Ghost not many days hence. When they therefore were come together, they asked of him, saying, Lord, wilt thou at this time restore again the kingdom to Israel? And he said unto them, It is not for you to know the times or the seasons which the Father hath put in his own power, but ye shall receive power after that the Holy Ghost is come upon you, and ye shall be witnesses unto me both in Jerusalem and in all Judea and in Samaria and unto the uttermost part of the earth. So here's the goal. The Spirit's going to come. You're going to witness for me here, and you're going to start working your way out. Where? Where do you stop? And here's where they were supposed to stop and where they did stop comes into a bit of conflict. They weren't supposed to stop until they got to the uttermost parts of the earth, right? And when he had spoken these things while they beheld, he was taken up in a cloud and received him out of their sight. So they start doing what they're supposed to do. They wait in Jerusalem. For Acts chapter 2, verse 1. And when the day of Pentecost was fully come, they were all with one accord in one place. Exactly like they're supposed to be doing, right? And suddenly there came a sound from heaven as of a rushing mighty wind, and it filled all the house where they were sitting. And there appeared unto them cloven tongues like as of fire, and it sat upon each of them. And they were all filled with the Holy Ghost, and began to speak with other tongues as the Spirit gave them utterance. And we know these aren't the tongues that most people like to think of today, where it's mostly babbling or gibberish, because we're going to see that they very much understood, and it has to do with interacting with people of other languages. Verse 5, and there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men out of where? Every nation under heaven. Why are they there? It's Pentecost. They're devout men. They've come back for the feast, just like they're supposed to. They're here in town. Here's the perfect time. If you're going to get the message that, hey, things are coming to a conclusion, this is when you need to do it. I've got everybody here. Verse 6, now when this was noised abroad, the multitude came together and were confounded, because that every man heard them speak in his own language. Well, real quickly, it's a little bit of a side note. Why are there Jews from every nation under heaven showing up they were scattered, right? So, as I understand it, when the 10 northern tribes split from the 2 southern tribes, And the 10 northern tribes were taken into captivity by the Assyrians prior to the Babylonian captivity of the two southern. The Assyrians' protocol or method of operation was they would take the people that they had conquered and scatter them throughout their kingdom. So there was no core group, or there wasn't really anybody left to establish any major resistance. So they would do this with all kinds of people. So these 10 tribes get scattered everywhere. And then because Judah had kept its act together a little bit better, they made it a little bit longer. Nebuchadnezzar comes in, he captures them, he drags them off to Babylon. So when they get permission to go back from Cyrus, if I get all my facts straight, head's working slower, so if I get it wrong, I apologize, but I believe it's Cyrus, gives them permission to go back to the land. Who goes back? Who's there in the Babylon region? It's primarily the two southern tribes. And as I understand, when it was repopulated, going up to the time of Christ, the only tribes that were very heavily represented were the two southern ones. The rest of the 10 had never really come back. They had gotten established, integrated with the societies they were in. But if you were devout and still held to your religion, now that you could come back to Jerusalem, you would. But they've been there for hundreds of years now. So they're speaking the languages and the locations they are, because you're talking about people who are born of people who were born there. And it appears the languages got lost, and that's why they're all back. And God's still using the Jews to do what he wants, but he's got this really handy opportunity to do it because they're already scattered around. So I want to get the word out to not only the Jews, but to the nations of what's going to take place. I got my messengers. I guess got to get the message to them. So we take 12 guys in Jerusalem, the apostles, give them the ability to communicate in all these other languages, and voila, they can all go home and share what's taking place, right? Verse 7, they were all amazed and marveled because saying one to another, behold, are not all these which speak Galileans? And how hear we every man in our own tongue wherein we were born? So there you go, you got that notion of not where we belong, but basically where they were born. Parthians and Medes and Elamites and the dwellers in Mesopotamia and in Judea and Cappadocia, in Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, in Egypt and in the parts of Libya about Cyrene, strangers of Rome, Jews and proselytes, Cretes and Arabians. We do hear them speak in our tongues the wonderful works of God. I've been told, I haven't had a chance to follow this up because it's low on the priority list, but I've been told that based on what those names of those nationalities represent, if you look at a map with Israel in the center, it's actually naming them off east to west from kind of the furthest reaches that Israel had reached in their captivity all the way to the western one. I think, like I said, I haven't followed that through, but it's kind of fascinating. And you can kind of see where he's going, and it does tend to work towards the east. You start with the Medes and the Parthians. That's all over Babylonian area, India as we know it. He ends in Rome and Crete. That's Mediterranean area. Rome right this time is huge. The Arabians one is the tricky one. That would seem to be a little more centrally localized, but at any rate, he's covering the known world of the time, the entire Roman Empire plus what was beyond it at this point in time. And they're all here. They've all been brought back together. Verse 12, and for the record, I kind of alluded to it, but you almost have a reversing of Babel going on. Babel, they were scattered, the tongues were confounded. All of a sudden now, as we get to a conclusion, God brings all of the people back to one place, and he's got the tongue barrier reversed. Because we're getting to the end. Why do I know we're getting to the end? Because that's what Peter says in a second, right? Verse 11, Cretes and Arabians, we do hear them speak in our tongues the wonderful works of God, and they were all amazed and were in doubt, saying one to another, what meaneth this? Others mocking said, these men are full of new wine. But Peter, standing up with the 11, lifted up his voice and said unto them, ye men of Judea, and all ye that dwell at Jerusalem, be this known unto you, and hearken to my words, for these are not drunken as ye suppose, seeing it is but the third hour of the day, but this is that which is spoken by the prophet Joel, and it shall come to pass in the last days, saith God, I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, and your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Prophecy's coming up. The calendar's running out. There's not much time left. We're down to, theoretically, 7 years. Although you would say that Israel's in that grace 1 year period right now to see if they're going to respond, because they hadn't done so hot throughout Jesus' ministry. But regardless, he's saying this is the beginning of the end of what's going on. we all need to know. We all need to get on the same page. We all need to start doing our job. As a matter of fact, when Peter writes, I've wondered about this. You can, I'm not going to go to war over this one, but I can't even find it. There we go. Let me do it this way. When Peter's writing to his audience, throughout most of Israel's history, we've got the there we go. We've got that back in Exodus chapter 19, when God says, "If you will obey my voice and hearken unto me, I will make you a peculiar treasure unto myself, a kingdom of priests," so on and so forth. Did they become a kingdom of priests that moment that they agreed? Didn't seem that way. He actually initiated a priesthood for them to prepare them for it. When you get to the four Gospels, what starts happening? What was one of the things the priests had to go through in order to be able to minister? They had to be baptized. They had to go through a washing ceremony, because if you were going to be, you had to be cleansed and purified in order to serve as a priest. So what starts becoming an en masse procedure for all those believing? You see this ritual of baptism starting to be incorporated into the general masses. Why? Because Israel's time is approaching where they are going to be offered that opportunity, not just to have their own priesthood, but to be a kingdom of priests. Because in Acts chapter 3, Peter says, hey, the kingdom's here. God will send Jesus Christ back unto you, and the times of refreshing will begin. Repent and be converted, right? Because here we need this to happen. But all the converts are being prepped. What does Peter say in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse, let's just start back a little bit. I'll start in verse 6. I'm sorry, I'm not in the Strong's version here, so it's just more straightforward. Wherefore also it is contained in the Scriptures, Behold, I lay in Sion a chief cornerstone, elect, precious, and he that believeth on him shall not be confounded. Unto you therefore which believe he is precious, but unto them which be disobedient, the stone which the builders disallowed, the same is made the head of the corner, and a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, even to them which stumble at the word, being disobedient, whereunto also they were appointed. But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, an holy nation, a peculiar people, that ye should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light. I could be dead wrong, but was he speaking specifically to that generation in that particular moment? It's not you are chosen generations. It's you were a chosen generation. I kind of wonder if Peter was calling them out. This was your opportunity. You stumbled at that stumbling stone, or at least the rest of the people did. The reason this isn't going through, what the promises and the prophecies taking place, is because the rest of the people stumbled. You were the chosen generation. You were the royal priesthood. I'm just throwing that out there as kind of an extra credit thing, but I can't help but wonder, because nowadays everybody tries to apply it to us, everybody in a general sense. But in Israel's program, not every generation was a royal priesthood, but there was one. And that would have been the one that Peter was writing to in this particular instance. So probably haven't studied that one out enough to bring it up, but I've probably stuck my foot in my mouth enough times here already that I don't know if it really much matters. Because then what does Peter go on to say, though, just to kind of to wrap this up? This is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel. And it shall come to pass the last days. We got all these things going on. There's going to be wonders in earth, signs in heaven. The sun's going to be darkened, the moon turned to blood, so on and so forth. And he starts telling them that the Messiah who came, the guy that you just crucified, was in fact the Son of God and the risen Christ. And it gets through to a lot of these folks who are sitting here. And what do they say? I'm skimming a bunch, and I apologize. But I'm pretty sure, I'd like to think most of you guys probably have read through here once or twice. Verse 37, now when they heard this, they were pricked in their heart and said unto Peter and to the rest of the apostles, men and brethren, what shall we do? Then Peter said unto them, repent and be baptized. Why? We got to get our nation ready. We got to get ready to go. We're supposed to reach out to the rest of the world. We've got to become that nation of priests we were intended. Be baptized, every one of you, in the name of Jesus Christ for the remission of sins, and ye shall receive the gift of the Holy Ghost. But here's the catch, in summary. The apostles virtually never leave Jerusalem. By the time you get to, chapter I think Paul Turner pointed this out at the spring conference, if I recall. And so credit to Paul Turner at this point for drawing my attention. But is it like in chapter 12?
Where they stayed in Jerusalem?
Yeah, 8,
1.
chapter 8. Yeah, chapter 8, verse 1, and Saul was consenting unto his death, and at that time there was a great persecution against the church, which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered abroad throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Kind of the rest of the people had gone out, but the apostles, they hadn't moved yet. And you could argue Jerusalem hadn't been converted yet, so I don't know, the motive might have been good. But either way, nothing was happening. You've got the stoning of Stephen, kind of symbolizing the end of that. You got the parable of the fig tree where Jesus is talking about the fig tree that grew in 3 years. It didn't bear fruit, so the gardener says, here, cut it down. Or the owner says that, and the gardener says, here, give me 1 more year to fertilize it and see if it'll bear any fruit. It sure seems like that's a parallel to Jesus' 3 years of ministry, which didn't result. Luke 13 is your chapter if you want it for future reference. I'm pretty sure. And give him 1 more year. And it's my understanding, the chronology of 1 year goes from Pentecost to the stoning of Stephen. You get a 1-year time lapse. And what's the event that takes place at the end of Acts chapter 7? The religious leaders of the day, when they hear the truth, what do? They stop their ears, they run on them, they stone them. And Stephen's comment is kind of enlightening too at the end of chapter 7 there. Verse 56, he says, and behold, I see the heavens open and the Son of Man standing on the right hand of God. They cried out with a loud voice, stopped their ears, and ran upon him with one accord. And it says in other locations that the Son of Man stands to judge and people. And I think they got the message. But Israel failed. Mankind failed. The nations failed. Now Israel's failed. So what's God going to do? Is he going to divide Israel up to the gods, or what? These are his chosen people. He's got what options are available to him. And tomorrow, what I want to do is we're look through how, rather than just bailing on the whole works, because every generation throughout time virtually has been a disaster, he's going to break down the barrier that separated his chosen people from the others, and he's going to reconcile the nations back unto himself. Romans chapter 11, if you want to read the story ahead of time, right? And give those nations who didn't deserve it, who struck out, because they 3 strikes and you're out, right? Back in Genesis, he's going to bump them up and reveal a new message to the Apostle Paul. So not only did the princes of this world blow it in the crucifixion, but they didn't consider the fact that God would even turn around and give the nations another chance. And in doing so, he's usurped their authority to some degree. He's put their power on hold. Why? Because now we can go directly to him. We don't have to go through a chosen people, and they're not happy about it. Why do we wrestle against principalities, powers, mights, dominions, spiritual wickedness in heavenly places? Because they've lost the control that they once had. But that doesn't mean they're not going to go down without some fights. And we'll try to take a look at some of maybe the strategies and the elements that take place today. But that's, Lord willing, we'll approach that tomorrow. So we'll go ahead and close with that for today.